Welcome back to my channel, everyone. So in today's video, I want to tell you guys about a stock that's under the radar right now that's on the cutting edge of doing something really great. So today I'm going to be talking to you guys about a company called the Metals Company, ticker symbol TMC. So here's the question I want to explore with you guys today. Is this stock the next gold rush, or is it just another risky gamble that will flop? As always, we have to discuss the potential risks, but with great risk come great rewards. So let's dive into whether or not this stock deserves a spot in your portfolio. TMC could be a pioneer when it comes to the deep ocean floor and deep sea mining.
And there they were, giant fields of nodules covering an alien landscape. Millions of years old, the nodules grow by absorbing metals from the seawater.
So it's simple. There are these metals forming at the bottom of the ocean called polymetallic nodules. I'm just going to call them rocks. You can think of them as minerals, rocks, whatever floats your boat. But they're these special rocks because they contain 4 important metals all in one rock. Hence the name polymetallic nodule. Poly for many and metallic for its various metals. The 4 metals in these rocks include nickel, copper, cobalt, and manganese. These metals are critical because they're used in everything important, from EV batteries to smartphones to medical devices and anything that requires cutting-edge technology. The Metals Company says that their technology is way less harmful to the environment because instead of mining and destroying landscapes, they have the technology to just suction the rocks right up from the ocean floor.
It'll drive around mining the nodules. But during this process, it will also collect about 5 to 30 centimeters of sediment from the sea floor. And this will all pass through the vehicle. The nodules will be retained, but the sediment will come out of the back of it.
They say that their process is far less damaging to the environment. Okay, so let's talk more about the Metals Company. So the Metals Company is a controversial Canadian company. They've been around for about 14 years, but they only recently went public in 2021. On May 30th, 2025, the stock was selling at around $4.20 per share. But 5 months ago, the stock was selling at about $1.50. So it's increased 180% since January of this year. They've been in the news a lot lately because of who they've aligned themselves with, their aggressive tactics with the UN, and their recent announcement to partner with the United States to start deep sea mining. But throughout its history as a company, the Metals Company has not been profitable. It's operating at a loss. But that doesn't scare us investors because if they're really onto something new and they're ahead of everybody else, well, that's a uniqueness that can make investors a lot of money. So this is a controversial company for obvious and not so obvious reasons. But for now, know that the Metals Company is interested in a specific area of the Pacific Ocean called the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. This is a 4.5 million square mile stretch of the Pacific between Hawaii and Mexico. This area is where the world's largest known deposits of these rocks lie. The Metals Company owns a kind of technology where they vacuum up these rocks with almost no pollution. Well, as for competition, the Metals Company seems to be at the forefront of this industry. The CEO has even stated that they could have started mining as early as last year if they were authorized. Still, they're not the only ones in this game. One of their notable competitors is a startup called Impossible Metals, and their pitch is a more gentle approach. Instead of dragging heavy equipment across the seafloor, their underwater robots just hover above these rocks with mechanical arms, carefully pick up the rocks instead of just sucking them up. The company says it's less disruptive to the underwater ecosystem. It sounds promising, but none of this has actually been tested at the deep levels where commercial mining would take place. So while the technology is intriguing, it's still very much in the prototype phase. Okay, so let's talk more about these polymetallic nodules. So how did these special rocks get to the bottom of the deep ocean floor? Well, over millions of years, tiny particles of these metals slowly fell to the ocean floor, layer by layer, and eventually formed these rocks. And these rocks don't move, they just grow in place over millions of years, just lying there on the seafloor. No digging is required to find them. The USGA estimates that there's 21.1 billion tons of these rocks on the ocean floor in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. This is far more than the amounts found on land around the world. Though highly speculative, it's estimated that all those rocks could add up to a combined value in the trillions of dollars. So let's talk about Nauru. So Nauru is a small island in the South Pacific Ocean. It's about 8 square miles, making it the third smallest country in the world, roughly the size of Manhattan. Nauru used to be a wealthy country, but due to mining on its land over the last century, it's been stripped of its natural resources. The center of the island looks barren, like a large wasteland, and today Nauru is dependent on foreign aid. So you might be asking, what does Nauru have to do with these special rocks and the metals company? Well, a lot. I'll explain. So because we're talking about international waters, we have to look at the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So the Law of the Sea says that the deep seabed is the common heritage of mankind, meaning that it belongs to everyone and yet no one at the same time. In other words, no single nation or company can claim ownership of these areas. So if that's the case, then how is TMC allowed to vacuum up these special rocks that belong to everyone and yet no one? Well, the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea allows extraction of these metals to occur if 2 rules are met. There's other rules and requirements, but at a minimum, if TMC can show that it has met these 2 requirements, then it's on the right track. So number 1, profits must help humanity, especially developing nations like Nauru. Well, Nauru and TMC have entered into an agreement where some portion of the revenues from the rocks would go to Nauru, perhaps through a royalty agreement, although we don't know the specifics of that agreement, but we can kind of consider this box checked. Secondly, a government must sponsor the private company like TMC doing the extracting from the ocean floor. Well, Nauru is TMC's government sponsor, and because Nauru is a signatory to the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, then this box is checked too. So what do you guys think? A win or what? Okay, so now let's talk about the International Seabed Authority, which is a UN agency. So this agency oversees mining in international waters, and their message is not so fast. They're saying that no one can do commercial mining operations just yet. So what's the holdup? Well, the ISA, which is the International Seabed Authority, can't seem to agree on the rules that would govern the mining process. For more than a decade, the ISA has been caught in kind of a tug-of-war situation. On one hand, the scientists and environmentalists are warning that deep-sea mining could wipe out ecosystems we barely even understand. But on the other hand, mining companies and some governments argue that deep-sea mining is actually cleaner than tearing up the land. And they say it's critical if we want to build enough batteries for electric vehicles and green tech. So where does that leave TMC and Nauru? Pretty much it leaves them in limbo. Without final rules from the United Nations, TMC can't mine the ocean floor and Nauru can't collect its royalties. Okay, so let's talk about President Trump. So in April of this year, President Trump issued an executive order basically telling US agencies to start preparing to issue permits for mining parts of the ocean. Well, this executive order completely bypassed the UN, and the president is not waiting for rules to come out or approval from the UN. The president wants to mine the ocean floor regardless of international rules. Well, guess who's on board with that plan? The metals company. Within days of the executive order, TMC filed for new permits to mine in the Clarion-Clipperton zone. Now here's where it gets kind of interesting. So for years, TMC pitched deep sea mining as part of the green energy revolution. But recently, they've pivoted to Washington's new love language, military defense. TMC is framing the need to mine as a national security issue. So the argument is simple. If the US wants to break its dependence on other countries for critical minerals, then this is how you do it. TMC is ready to move forward under American authority if the ISA keeps dragging its feet. But mining in international waters without ISA approval is illegal under international law. So while the president may not care about international law, TMC might have a legal battle in its future with the international courts. Still, TMC is clearly betting that they can push this one through. And honestly, they might not be wrong. So up until recently, everything the metals company has done, the exploration, the environmental research, the licensing, has been through its partnership with Nauru. Nauru was its sponsoring country for purposes of the UN's process. So now that TMC is pivoting to the US for permits, what happens to Nauru? They don't have environmental data or legal rights outside of those original UN-approved zones. So are they planning to mine somewhere else on behalf of the USA? And if so, where exactly? Because the territory has already been parceled out under UN licenses and the US is not a developing nation. And is Nauru supposed to walk away from the UN completely and start reporting to Washington now? Would they even want to? Or is TMC planning to show up in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone and start mining with or without the backing of nations that sponsored them? The legal and geopolitical implications are big, and so far nobody's really explained how any of this would actually work. If the US bypasses the UN and starts issuing mining permits on its own, what's to prevent them or Russia or any other nation from ignoring the rules and racing to extract the special rocks? This could trigger a free-for-all. A global push to strip mine the seabed could end badly for everyone, including TMC and its shareholders. If fragile ecosystems collapse or legal and diplomatic fights break out, the fallout could be enormous. That's not a sustainable investment. Because this isn't just about who gets there first. It's about whether we're willing to toss aside decades of ocean governance and what kind of world we're left with if we do. Okay, so the big question, is TMC a buy? Honestly, for me, the unknowns here are just too big to call this an investment. This is a gamble, plain and simple. There's too many moving parts, too many powerful interests bumping against each other. You've got the US possibly backing TMC, which puts them on a collision course with the UN. And then there's the original deal with Nauru. TMC was supposed to help the small island nation tap into the green energy transition. But if they pivot to mining under a US license, what happens to that promise? Does Nauru just get left behind? And if countries start bypassing international rules, we're looking at a potential free-for-all. That's when corners get cut and oversight gets ignored, and then chaos. So here's where I stand with this. To be perfectly clear, I'm approaching this as a calculated gamble. I've allocated a modest sum, I'm fully prepared to lose it, and I'm at peace with that possibility. So this isn't what I consider a sensible investment, but more of like a just in case type of bet. If it surges, amazing. If it plummets, well, that outcome was always in the realm of expectations. The crucial point is that I'm entering this with clear-eyed awareness, and this is not a long-term commitment, but a measured, speculative play, nothing more. All right, guys, so let me know what you think in the comments below. Would you invest in this company? What are your opinions on it? And as always, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I will see you guys next week. Have an amazing week. Bye.